Hey everyone, welcome to this episode 3 of Nozzle Reaction, Aging Fire Training Officers Uncensored. I'm Andy, and with us is Matt Van Giesen, and we're super excited about the traction that our little program is getting in the fire community, particularly among volunteers and even some career agencies. We have a YouTube channel now, the link to which the next video will be at the end of this one. And Matt is learning all of the technological attributes of this platform so that we can look like other people who know what the hell they're doing.
Yeah, old
And
dogs, new tricks.
yeah, and it's great to be with you, Matt, and it's great to be with you, our listeners and our viewers. And Matt and I have been excited to record this episode because in recent past, of all departments that have been the brunt of a lot of press with a television show, even in its name, Tacoma Fire has come out with an absolutely wonderful piece on trauma and living with trauma and finding the courage to become transparent about that with others in your department and your agency. And wonderful caregivers and clinicians are also featured in this video that are anchored in the world of traumatology, a fascinating discipline that is solely oriented towards supporting people who have to live with the results of high risk work, being exposed to horrific kinds of things in the public safety domain. And when Matt and I both saw that, we had to start an episode and talk about it, because that's part of Matt's story. Matt's story includes his own arc in trauma. So I don't want to take any thunder, Matt. I just want to kind of just set the stage for this discussion.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so we'll link the video from Tacoma Fire. It's called "The Call We Carry: Confronting PTSD in the Fire Service."
Yeah.
And like Andy said, yeah, hats off to Tacoma Fire for having the courage to step up. I think obviously, in the fire service, there are some stigmas that maybe sometimes prevent us from wanting to talk about or even admit that PTSD is probably a part of our everyday life. And I'm sure I'm not unique in that. I'm sure there are calls that you went on, Andy, that are still with you today in some aspect.
Yeah, certainly. And the measure that, because I have and still am in I have an anchoring in the behavioral health space. We're dealing with trauma and traumatology in all kinds of domains, not just public safety and fire, but we're dealing with it in corrections, law enforcement, and even the care and services field, particularly psychiatric care and services. And wherever we see an uptick of events that create deep emotional imprints on human beings, and very often that can be violence, and where violence is coming into contact with people who have duties to respond to it, this is the phenomena we're seeing. And the cultures of these agencies, healthcare probably more inclined to be open to supporting a workforce with trauma related services. But when you think of public safety, police, fire, EMS, it's almost for years in our cultures, that kind of approach to supporting people was an afterthought. Meanwhile, our armed services picked up on this a long time ago, when people would come back from conflict and we would have massive referrals into the VA and our armed services care systems. And they were looking at the sheer numbers of that, saying, we have to do something. And, again, great job on Tacoma, because the more that we can support our people who are incurring this trauma, and the more that we can equip them with resilience and the ability to normalize certain outcomes of working in that kind of high risk environment, just the better world that we will create. But we're late to the dance in fire on this.
Yeah, I think not just fire, EMS. I don't know the police world as much, but one of the often forgotten are the dispatchers. The
Oh my
911
gosh, yes.
dispatchers, and their role is so unique. There's I mentioned the stigma against that we don't have this problem, or I had a great conversation. I shared the video with a coworker of mine, not related in the emergency field, and it was interesting, as his perception of PTSD was not unlike mine was 15, 20 years ago. He didn't quite understand how that happens. He actually thought maybe he was emotionally numb. I've had this happen. And I kind of equated it to if a person's in a car accident, driving down wherever, going to the grocery store, they get in a fender bender. To them, that is a traumatic experience. That is trauma inducing. It induces a trauma response by your body. The thing about that is they don't have it happen again. So over the next week or two, and the story that we were talking about, I believe, I don't know the specifics, it's not important. He'd gone through an intersection, got hit by somebody that ran the red light. And I asked him, I said, so the next time you drove through that intersection, did you think about it? Oh yeah, I thought about it. I was like, for how long? Oh, about a month or so. And then I kind of forgot about it. I was like, well, over that month of reoccurring, you drove through that intersection. Each time you drove through it, you were retraining your body not to have that fear response, not to have that emotional response to the traumatic event. So eventually you do get over trauma. And you, as you know, Andy, and I found out, PTSD, if it's kind of a ugly label, but it's curable, it's treatable. It is something that we do regularly.
In fact, most of the language today, Matt, we even dropped the D. We just describe it as post-traumatic stress. And it's funny you mentioned the vehicle, the MVA. My wife rolled her vehicle some years ago, many years ago, and even today, you want to see, and people don't understand. Trauma is anything that creates a deep emotional imprint,
right,
that results in limbic system activity, things that are produced out of the brainstem, fear, insecurity, paralysis, right? Like,
so for everybody that doesn't understand that, that's your caveman brain back here.
Yeah.
Autonomously controlling your body functions, adrenaline release, cortisol release.
Yes.
That's the shakes you get. All of that after something like if you go through a haunted house and somebody jumps out and scares you, that's
the brainstem. Yeah. So my wife today, if it snows and we're on a slope in a vehicle, it doesn't matter that this rollover occurred 12, 13 years ago. She begins to experience the fear and the anxiety that she was experiencing when the roll was happening, when she was in the vehicle. And this becomes something to deal with when we're driving in snow. I mean, it's profound that the human body can do this and can act on deep emotional imprints from things years ago in a way as if it's happening right now. And we just manage it. There's no criticism or judgment of it. We just manage it. I'll find a different way to go. I'll slow down. I'll do something so that she can manage in the moment what she's having to manage. And as you and I both know, Matt, and certainly what was described in that Tacoma video, there are times where people need to go for help with specific interventions for trauma, like EMDR, like certain modes of thought processing and thought stopping to get to the other side of this so that we can function in the world, because it can be debilitating.
Oh, absolutely. I can take you down some pretty dark places. For me, they used, and it's actually birthed in the Pacific Northwest. It was a lifespan integration, which was very, as a user of it,
Yeah,
very
tell us
odd.
more about that. I think that's fascinating, and people would love to learn about what that is.
Well, I'm kind of simple-minded, so I don't know exactly what it does or how.
I
Well,
don't think.
I understand
I
how
think
it
that's
works.
fine.
The, the simple analogy for me was the way it was explained by my counselor Todd was your trauma events. You know, your memories are kind of linear. All these patterns going across, and what happens is if you have a traumatic experience, it jumbles them all up. It just kind of your memory patterns just kind of get whacked, if you will. So what you do is you kind of start at the beginning before that with a notable event, and you go through your timeline across the time span, and you get to the traumatic experience, and you kind of go through it, and then back to others, and over time, and I simplify this. You spend a lot of time talking about and reliving. Really, what you're doing is you're reliving that experience of the traumatic moment.
Yes, you are.
Even as far in as detailed as you can get, even as detailed of there were one of the calls that we worked on specifically, we talked about what happened in the call, very specific sights, sounds, smells, before, during, and after the call, and across the timeline, like I said, about probably within years of that. And we kept replaying it over and over again, over and over again. And each time we replayed it, he would challenge me to think about it differently, finalizing almost in a kind of in a position where I was talking to myself. So it's what I
Right.
know now, if I would have known then. So here I am, you know, Todd's telling me, if you were standing next to yourself in this moment, what would you tell yourself about that call? You know,
Oh, what an
you're
interesting kind of
you're describing, yeah. So you're
approach.
describing to me that you're in this traumatic experience, you're witnessing this horrible event. What would you tell yourself right now about what's going on there? Because you've told me how you felt at that time. Knowing where you're at today, what would you tell yourself? And
Matt,
you
isn't
know, and
that
it kind of
fascinating?
reprograms.
God, I love what I'm
Yeah.
hearing.
And it was so simple, honestly. It was so simple. And today, that was 3 years ago when I first started going into counseling. Today, the format is so much more refined. It is as simple as just going through my timeline over and over again a few times, and the different memories that'll pop into my head on
And you'll
different things that he said.
integrate them. It almost
Yeah, and
sounds
they're
like the
not all.
Jungian process of integration.
It is, and it's not just traumatic experiences that are in my timeline. I have timelines like the birth of my children, my marriage, buying a house, buying a new vehicle, taking a vacation. And intermixed in those are some very traumatic experiences that, as a general overview, that we can kind of help settle down and help my responses to not be so acute.
Matt, as I age, and what I'm hearing in this description is someone who took the time to help reorganize the thoughts that were disrupted by the traumatic event, like the fragmentation just went all over the rest of your
Right.
life's timeline, and you're getting it back into order.
You're
And
saying it so much more eloquently than I did, but that's
yeah,
exactly
I
what
love
it is.
that. I'm feeling how that would work, and I'm envisioning if I could speak to my younger self today, I would be far more gentle on me than I would have been if I were coaching myself and I were 15 years younger. In other words, if I were young and speaking to my younger self, I would have been 10 times harder on that person than I am now. And
I say it
what I
often.
am now would have been far more helpful.
For sure. I say it often. Had I known what I know now before I broke, you know, if I could just replay 10 years, it would be, my life would be different today. Maybe better, maybe worse. I don't know. But it would have been different if I had, and I don't want to sound like I had bad mentors or didn't have the right people, or that, you know, organizationally there wasn't help offered. But Yeah, and this is a great lead into this rabbit hole that I wanted to kind of investigate a little was
Yeah.
why didn't why didn't I recognize that I was having problems? Why did I deny for so long that the environment that I had built around myself, and I mean specifically said built around myself. Yeah, pardon the jets coming over. So I built that environment. I put myself in those positions and I surrounded myself with those people and the places that I was working in. So I wasn't able to recognize or willing to recognize that they were harmful to me, that I
Oh,
was suffering from all these stressors. And
we
when you
never
look,
do, Matt. God damn, be gentle with yourself. We never do. I
oh, of
didn't want,
course,
I didn't want to either with my own drinking,
yeah.
and I knew it was just wrecking everything. And I
Oh,
get it, bro.
there were times where I was so angry and over what I don't know. I was so angry. I remember sitting in my chair in the living room in the manner and the words that was using with my daughter, my youngest daughter, the way I would talk to both of my kids. And it was almost like an out of body experience. I could see myself and I knew better. I knew that the words and what I was saying was hurting them, that I was damaging them. I
Yeah.
was causing them hurt. And I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop it. It was like I said, an out of body experience just watching it. And I didn't know how to stop it. There was so much just anger and frustration on all these mixed emotions. And I didn't know where they were coming from. I didn't know
Yeah.
why they were there. When you watch the video from Tacoma, one of the things that it's almost unspoken. We forget how complex our lives are. Andy and I were talking in the green room before this about what chaotic weeks we've had and are still having today, right now. You look at that, how often when we see a coworker that, we just came off a bad call, car accident, and Andy, you're in a small community. I grew up in a small community. When you go on 911 calls in those environments, there's almost a guarantee that you have a 1 or 2, maybe if you're lucky, only a 3-degree connection to that person that you're responding to. And that emotional toil it just magnifies it. So you're going to this call and you're going to deal with these issues, this baggage that you're going to collect on the call. We don't always consider the fact that what's going on at home, what other stressors are involved. And that was really my downfall. I had been able to manage all the department, all the calls. I didn't ever have nightmares on calls. I was always able to decompress. I was always able to handle the bad stuff. And most of my medicine was by dealing with the younger people in the department, the people that worked for me, the
Yeah.
people around me. If I was command and we went on, let's say a self-inflicted or a suicide type call, I would spend the next 48 hours touching base with all the responders that worked for me on that call, making sure, hey, are you doing all right? Was that your first one? Have you seen something like that before? Do you have
Right.
any questions about how you feel? And for me, that was cathartic. That helped me process by talking to them.
Yeah.
What happened was I had external pressures that started to magnify: fatigue, injuries, the loss of my brother
Yeah.
in a combat related death. So all those things were piling up, and they were rocks in my backpack. I mean, there's analogies out the yin yang.
Yeah.
Those all piled up on me, and suddenly, and man, talk about neon warning signs. Calls that hadn't bothered me, that I hadn't thought about, started popping up.
And
Not as nightmares.
that's an extremely valuable measure. What horrific thing can I be around where my emotional arousal needle doesn't move at all? And if it doesn't, it's
That's
worthy to say, I just want to know, why isn't my needle moving here? Why don't I feel anything? And
well, that was always one of my major responses when I was counseling with other firefighters. They're like, man, this is really getting to me. I'd be worried if it didn't. If you didn't have this emotional response to what we just experienced, I would be extremely concerned for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
Or in my
the
case, it was manifesting more as anger.
yeah. And
Much
that's
more.
a very frequent way trauma shows up.
Yes,
In a great deal of the work I do, we're trying to transform that anger that shows up for people who have lived through trauma, by how we intervene when we have responsibilities to, right now in our state, Matt, and all throughout the West Coast, we're moving our crisis response system for behavioral crisis to 988, and many,
yeah,
many of the calls that drive that system is the presentation of anger, aggression, and discontrol. And on almost every one of those calls, the people that drive the activation of the system, are expressing themselves, however broken and maladaptively, to get their need met in the world through anger. And when you
sure.
get past that, what you find is that what this person has had to live through is horrific.
Well, and just that, when you reach the anger stage, you're already broken.
Yeah, man.
You
Absolutely.
yeah, and I, you know, you see the flowers planted on the side of the road where there was a fatality accident,
Yep.
and never thought much of it. Calls I'd been on and everything, and all of a sudden, we're driving down the highway, wife and kids in the car, and I go into a tirade. I go off. Do those people not understand what that does? That just brings back bad memories for us. I was there. I remember that. I don't want to think about that again. How can they be so thoughtless as to do that?
Right.
And
Meanwhile, it's someone trying to honor their deceased loved
exactly.
one, friend, or whatever. But the way that you internalize
Well,
that is making me dysregulated.
and that's exactly, yeah. I was fighting the response because, well, I didn't want to admit I had a problem. I didn't even see it. I mean, I look back now and it's like, wow, I was so
Yeah.
far beyond. But why didn't I recognize it sooner? Why didn't I say, hey, this isn't right? Something, and like I said, the organization, the chief I was working for, we had some pretty horrific calls pile up pretty fast paced. We're talking very young children in a house fire that succumbed, and I was part of the recovery process for that. And again, it's not just when you're in a leadership role, you may not just be burdening your own pressures and feelings and emotions.
You got to think about the rest of your team.
My team's there, and in a leadership role, I'm working with them and I'm protecting them and I'm comforting them. So I'm trying to take some of that load from them, and rightfully so. That's my job. But because of the other issues I had going on in the background, and it literally is a snowball effect.
It is, to where you can start telling yourself, I can manage this half a fifth a night of bourbon. I can manage it.
Yeah, well, fortunately,
I'll
I
be okay.
never,
I got a
for
hold on it.
for good reasons, I never turned to alcohol. I was very fortunate. I
Yeah,
honestly,
I did.
well, honestly, in the state I was, if I had, I would not likely be talking to you today.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
the,
Well,
the
thank
path,
God. Thank God we're
yeah,
here.
absolutely. The path I went down was dark enough as it was. Yeah, someday we can dig into that even more.
Yeah. That's
I
good.
really want to talk about, really that why thing. And I have a book here. It's a great book on leadership. It's also a book. It's a good lesson on how, as we mature and grow in life experiences and within a system like the fire service,
Yep.
how our viewpoints can change, and most likely will change. It's the book's called About Face by David Hackworth.
Oh, yeah. Hackworth.
Yeah, phenomenal book. He's got two books. There were two books that were published: Steal My Soldier's Heart and
Yep.
About Face. About Face is probably my favorite, and and this fit me well, and it's cautionary now. I had read it before I went through all this, but it didn't really sink in the same context. But especially in the volunteer service, the leader in the role that I found myself in, and that I kind of defined for myself, but more importantly, the role that the people around me defined for me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And he talks about this because we mentioned with that picture that I had up on the first one, the legacy, that what's the legend around me?
The lore. Yeah.
Yeah, the lore
And,
and the
and it was their being in the burn room in the recliner chair that started
yes.
that discussion.
So, the people around us are what create those.
Oh, yeah.
I never went out of my way to create myself in some, some mystical figure or some,
Right. That
god
happens
of
in
fire.
relationship.
It just happens over time because we do things in the way our people look up to us at times through admiration and whatnot. That kind of just happens. So he talks about what it's like to be in that legend position, if you're a legend, and this is right out of his book. But this presents a problem for a leader legend because you reach a point where you can't let your men know you make mistakes. You just can't, even when it means you become trapped somewhere between who you really are and what they want you to be.
Yeah.
Man, that one kicks me right in the nuts, man.
Yeah.
Because I fell prey to that. I got to the point where I'm going to push through whatever's going on right now. I'm going to push through it. I'm going to fake it and just keep going because these people depend on me so much. And what I was actually doing was putting them in harm. I was putting myself in great peril, but at the same time, I was actually failing them in the long run because I at some point I broke and I had to leave.
Yeah. I'm so glad you courageously put that out there because I think that young men grapple with this a great deal.
Yeah.
Men of all ages, actually, but I think young men in particular grapple with how they project to the world. And
what persona they've got on today and how it fits in. Sure.
Yep. And it takes I don't know, almost like suffering is a prerequisite to come to the understanding and insight that transparency and empowering people to be the best version of themselves, not the template of what I think they should be, but the best version of them, may contemplate different levels of willingness to be transparent in each of them. In other words, I think the way you are today, your willingness to come out with that is a product of your suffering and experience. And perhaps if circumstances were different 15 years ago, 10 years ago, Matt, maybe your leadership style would have adapted to be more transparent, enabling you to influence your people in a different way. I don't know. I think there are times when the circumstances require very strong leadership that projects an image of, let's say, almost invulnerability. I think there are times when that's necessary, when things are very, very high stakes. But what's interesting is that those are the infrequent moments. Most of the time, the day-to-day stuff, we apply that level of almost unassailability and invulnerability to the day-to-day stuff, and we don't need to do that. That's not when it's appropriate.
Right. Oh, absolutely.
When you're at Thermopylae, no Spartan dies today. We get that. We're not going to die today, Leonidas. And we know at the end of this thing, we're all going to get killed. But you want us to move through a day without being killed? We can do that. But not every day is Thermopylae in the hot gates. You know what I mean? We have to operate in the world.
Well, and I think as leaders, we need to make sure that we're stepping up and not just providing the resources, not just checking the boxes. I don't like the checkbox type of firefighting as it is.
Yeah.
So I think we need to go out and lead by example in this arena more than any other. We had a very unfortunate loss in our department last year. Well, the department I had been with, and one of the guys that started out in my station worked for me. He had been here, left, and then came back. And his name was Tyler. And Tyler, unfortunately, took his own life.
Oh,
And you know, and I'll bear some of that. You know, obviously, I didn't cause it in any way, shape, or form. It's a funny, not even funny really, but it's an uniquely. I drove by his house about 4 or 5 days before, and I had thought to myself, boy, I haven't heard from Tyler in a long time. I should give him a call.
ah,
And I didn't.
yeah.
I didn't do it, and I should have done it. And that's a different topic, maybe. But looking at the station, because we were a family, the little satellite, little tiny little 2-bay station that I operated, we were a family, and so we got together, and I brought pizzas in, and we sat around, and we talked about Tyler, and we talked about our own problems and our baggage, the stuff that we're carrying around, and the resources that are available to us as individuals and as a family, just in that room. And I brought my counselor Todd with me. I had
That's
emailed him and said,
leadership
"Hey,
right there, Matt.
this
That's
is what's
leadership
going
right
on.
there.
Will you come with me?" And he absolutely. He said, "I'd love to." And he didn't steal the show. He hung off on the side and just
Yep.
he was there if they needed him. You know, I wasn't pushing like you need to come talk to him or any. But hey, this is my counselor. This is the guy I talked to. This is what brought me out of the abyss. If I had gone to him before I went in, it would have been just a hop, skip, and jump over a little dirty puddle.
Right. Right.
And you know, I provided it as not just a check in the box resources, but the idea behind it was that, look, you guys look up to me. I'm your legend. I broke because I wasn't willing to bend, but look at me bend now. Look at me today.
Yes.
This is what I need. You have to do this because I don't. I'd like to get a career firefighter on here someday and talk about the difference. I thought about this a lot with the Tacoma video. You know, they mentioned the fact that, you know, they work together 24, 48 hours at a time. They're together. They work together. They live together. They eat together. They pretty much are in that station together. They go through a traumatic call. They come back to the station and kind of, yeah, okay. And then they kind of go about their day and finish out, and they kind of each goes off in their own position, but they're still together. And I'm just trying to, I was really curious about that dynamic, because I know in the volunteer world, we go on the bad call, we come back,
everybody goes home.
We got to go home, and we might not see each other until the next training, which is once a week, if everybody's there and shows up. And it might not be till the next call.
Matt,
we lose touch completely with our people.
Yeah.
And it's so hard because the number one thing we get from them is their time. So the last thing I want to do is say, now, granted, on major fatality type stuff,
right? We're going to be in CISD, and we're all going to have to stay.
And we would do that, but even those formats, when I'm looking at my station and let's say the 8 firefighters that I had at that station, the best thing I could do was right then and there at the engine, in the engine bay, after the call, before we all leave, make sure that, you know, and I'm not going to hide it. I'm a touchy feely. I got no problem hugging another man. That physical contact, I feel, is massive for creating that emotional connection that solidifies those relationships that we need.
You know, Matt, when I hear you talking about a career agency and people on shift for 24, 48 hours, and by the way, there are still some volunteer agencies that staff that way and pay like a small stipend.
There's combination. There's all in between. Yeah.
What I envision when I hear that is a bunch of people coming back to the station and then each going off in their own corner doing their own thing.
Sure.
While they may be together, I think they're going to process the event differently, and it may not be optimal. And I don't see that as much different in effect than in a volunteer agency, people having to go home. the common theme between those two is that in the absence of a meaningful intervention following one of these events, like critical incident stress debriefing, critical incident stress management, diffusing, following up leadership, following up with people the day after, within a few days, checking in, observing if there are changes in performance or behavior, following up with people to get them appropriate referrals before this stuff becomes problematic. Anything short of that, I don't think it matters if it's career or volunteer, or when people are left to their own devices. The culture of our domain is that, baby died, get back to work.
Well,
House burned down, get back to work. You had your hand in someone's body cavity by mistake and you came out with some stuff on it, get back to work. Like that whole approach, the jury is back and the data is in, that was wrong. That was bad. We got that wrong.
Well, it interesting you say the baby's dead, because so I look at that as, and this is my curiosity, as a career, I go off in my own corner of the station and I process it in isolation. Maybe if I do decide 2 or 3 hours later, maybe I go over and I crack some jokes with somebody, because we all know that crass humor is our healer too.
Yeah, that's also our culture.
But I have that, absolutely. I learned that on the first one I ever went to.
Yeah.
But then I take my experience with that. I'm in EMT class, getting my first time going through EMT class, the only time I passed. I go through EMT class, and at a certain point, you have to start doing ride-alongs. You're like, you can work under the paramedic.
Yeah.
So I get medical tones on my pager. First, I'm talking 72 hours into having medical tones. We get a call, and it's for a 4-month-old Sid CPR. And it's, 3/4 of a mile from my house. So I'm literally like the second, third one in the door in front of the medics. The medics come in, and I talk about a traumatic experience. Boom. And this child looked identical to the mannequin that we use for CPR training. It was
the little one
posture, everything. I walk in, I look at that. I'm like, wow. And I almost blurted out, hey, it looks just like the mannequin.
I would have said that.
Yeah. Well, so people need to understand, if somebody watches this that doesn't do fire response, we compartmentalize. That's how we deal with what we see.
Yeah.
When those pagers go off, when the alarm sounds, when the bells go off in the station, those walls start being built immediately as soon as that call goes out. Those walls are going up. We start to compartmentalize immediately. That's just how we function.
Yep. We suspend reactivity, as my colleague Laura Moss says. We suspend reactivity.
We suppress our adrenal response, everything across the board. We just suppress, control, compartmentalize, go do the job, and then later on everything kind of falls apart sometimes. So the infant one, I come home from that call. I'm alone there. I'm the only one out of that station at that time that responded. I get back to the station, and they ended up, it was terminal. They had to call it on scene. It was very, very crazy. At the time, my oldest was about 6 months old, and she was at home in the crib. Here it is, 6:30 in the morning, wife's still in bed, everybody's still asleep. I come home, I walk in the house, my wife's like, are you okay? I'm like, no. She goes, was it bad? I was like, the worst. And then I got to go in the bedroom and I got to check on my baby.
Oh God, Matt.
And then, and then compound it. Then I got to get dressed and go to work.
Right.
I didn't have any time to process it because life was still moving on.
Awful.
So it was talk about it. And that's where I get that. What's that difference? Does that make a difference? And how, as volunteers, is there a way? Because I don't know that the way that career get to go off in their own corner of the station or go wash the rig or go roll some hoe or whatever they may have to do, clean, cook, whatever duties they have, if that's a better method for them to process and give them some isolation or small group, or they have the availability, or as a volunteer to go back into your normal life, to face your family, to face your boss, to face your employees, to face your customers. I don't know if there's something
Matt,
out there,
I don't,
somebody
I
out there
can't
that
say
has a
there's a
good
right way,
process.
but I can't say there's a right procedure, but there are things that we know that are right to do.
Well, that are better
And
and things we shouldn't not
I,
do.
and I'll tell you something interesting about, I mentioned them earlier, the Spartans. The
Mhm.
Spartans were probably the first military force that implemented their own wellness program. And this is what
Okay.
it was. Following a battle, they would stay on the field for 30 minutes after they got done cleaning someone's clock
Yeah.
and taking casualty along the way. Their ritual was they would stay on the field for 30 minutes afterward, wail, hold each other, sob, grieve the loss of their loved ones, collect the wounded and the dead. I should have just said dead. That was the period for high
Decompress.
expressed emotion
Right.
following the engagement. After that period of time, it was time to put that down now and go back to work. So they had built into their system an actual time frame for some kind of emotional processing. And what we know from the neuroscience today, believe it or not, is that if unscrewed with, the life of an emotion is just 90 seconds. If
Yeah.
if left untouched, that's what it is. So what I think is interesting is that, to my knowledge, the first organized system that we ever saw around honoring the need to do something procedurally following a traumatic event was CISM. And we do it in a lot of organizations throughout the country and the world. The high quality of it could be considered questionable based upon who's administering it. But the notion of building something into um, highly stressful events following, in other words, following a highly stressful call or event, building something into the time together to attend to emotional well-being, I think is a right thing to do compared to not.
Right. And I think sometimes there's a hesitancy with CISM because maybe it's the misconception that it has to be a formal event. It can be you and your response partner on a BLS rig. When you get back to the station, just look at each other and say, "Are you okay?" I'm not. That kind of
Yeah.
got me.
Well, most
It
people
doesn't
don't know
have to
what
be
the hell to
formal.
do.
It's just a
They,
decompression. It's just a release of that emotion, like you said. Because once it's gone, you can let it go. It's good. If it's when you bottle it, you trap it, you lock it up, you don't process it,
I
that
feel
it'll keep coming
afraid.
back.
I felt anxious during that. I
Yeah.
didn't want to have to do that. To be free to say those things in a way where you're not going to get dimed out, where your sense of persona remains intact, where your
Yep.
ego isn't assailed, where you're not engaging in performance appraisal of other people. Everybody talks about their shit. I was
Yeah.
terrified during that.
And
And
and this is the other key to that. When your partner, when your crew, when your team says that, your response is, I think that's normal. I felt a little bit like that too.
yes,
Validate their feelings. Don't just
yes.
say, you're a sissy. That's what
Yeah.
I've never
See,
felt like that on a
that's the
call.
BS. And the
Those
people who
calls
do
don't
that,
bother me. Don't
God,
say that. I mean, even if they don't bother you, great, good for you. Chances are they do bother you. You just haven't had the misfortune for them to manifest yet. Because if you pile them, they're going to someday get to you.
dude,
So
you're
yeah,
you're
validate their
nailing it.
response.
And the people who carry that braggadocio stuff about it, very, very few people are not hiding from the world
No.
what the outcome is, the cost of that. Like they say that, don't be a sissy, and then they go home and they pound um, you know,
Right.
some Jim Beam.
Alcohol. Yeah, yeah.
And
They're hitting
and
drugs, they're
nobody
hitting
knows.
alcohol.
And that's
Well, and some of them manifest it different. Some of them go to the gym and they just live in the gym and they force it out that way. I mean, it's not always it doesn't always manifest it in a
that's true.
socially unacceptable or maybe a less acceptable
What's
or
unacceptable about drink? What's socially unacceptable about drinking?
Nothing really, I guess. I don't have a drinking problem. So,
Well, Matt, I think this kind of discussion, and the freedom with which we can have this kind of discussion for others to see that this kind of discussion is normal.
absolutely.
I think is certainly, it always feels good to do it. And to the extent that people in our A-type personality workspaces, EMS, fire, law enforcement, can feel more and more comfortable. I mean, I think both of us certainly have the credentials to be able to say, we've been around enough stuff to constitute, and enough personal suffering to constitute we have a membership card. And I think what we're trying to share here is that there are other ways of talking about this and engaging the world, than to ignore it, to put it aside, to think that there's no value in that. Thank God for that piece by Tacoma Fire,
Absolutely.
raising awareness about it. Thank God for all of the things that are going on to raise awareness about how trauma influenced the lives of people working in high stakes environments, and what you can do to have what you do as a high stakes responder be part of your life. It doesn't have to be all of your life, and you don't have to give your life away just to be part of that domain of work.
For sure. Yeah. And for anybody out there that's listening, if you need to talk to somebody, we're here. You can hit us up in the comments. You can email, direct message. There are resources out there. Code 4 Northwest is a phenomenal group.
Safe Call Now, Sean Riley, the Institute for Responder Wellness. And Matt and I know a lot of these people, or we know who knows them, and we can get you plugged in. So we're not trying to turn this program into a referral service, but if you're feeling inspired as a result of this program today, and you want to get plugged into something,
Even
it'll
if
be
it's
confidential, and reach out and we'll help.
Even if it's proactive, preventive, that's where I missed the boat. I knew the resources were there, but I denied my need for them. And yeah, it was too late. If I had been proactive, if I had gone out and participated more in those types of opportunities, I wouldn't have broken.
Yeah.
I would have been able to maintain and been a better leader in that aspect. So,
and look what you're doing now, and look at the leadership you're producing now. You wouldn't have been able to do that without
I got
that,
a second chance, Andy. I got a second chance. So that's a major blessing. So, and thank you to everybody that watches. Thanks for subscribing. If you haven't, hit the subscribe button, please. The more we can get, then spread it, share it. The more we do get that kind of support, the more of these we'll be able to put out, and we'll try to broaden the platform and find other ways to share this to you. And thanks.
Indeed.
We're up to four viewers now. So thanks to the 4 people watching.
Yes. on YouTube. We got a lot of good traction on Vimeo and LinkedIn. And I'm glad we're doing the YouTube thing. Let's grow that. So
absolutely.
All right. Take good care, Matt. Take good care, all.
Andy. Take care, everybody. Thank you.